5:30 p.m. Is there a motion to approve the minutes from June the 11th, 2018?
Make a motion.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Next thing on the agenda is the presentation by Dr. Booth on the Tri-County Tech College.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, council members, thanks for letting us come talk about our needs for the future. First, let me say it's been a really good year already. It's nice to have the campus open, and I was driving through the county earlier, a couple places, and saw the sign that pointed people to the Oconee campus, so that was nice to see those signs. I'd not seen them before. Before you is our budget request for this year, and as we always do, we show you what we're asking for all three counties, since the way we ask is really outlined in legislation, so you can see, in fairness, what we're asking all three counties. And let me just kind of cut to the bottom line and say we're going to, this year, asking for less money than we did last year. And actually, not a lot, but $5,200 is $5,200, so actually a little less money than last year. If you'll note, we've actually decreased our request in plant operations, and some of that's through efficiencies we've developed. Quite honestly, every time we build a new building, we build a building that costs, but it's more efficient to operate in terms of utilities, all water, heat, air, light, all of it. So we've been fortunate in that sense, but we do have a small increase in our capital renovations request, but that's offset by the decrease in the other, but the net effect is a smaller request than we have for FY19. We have a number of projects on campus that we're working on. When we were before you a couple of years ago, we said we did not plan to build anything new in any time soon. Well, we've got a lot of old buildings on campus we need to rehab. If I could say, some time ago, with ADA passed, we updated some restrooms, but let's just say it was minimal to meet the code. They're really in tough shape. So we have a number of restrooms on campus we need to fix. We have the center part of the campus, which is a bit of a mess after the construction, that over time we need to do some work to. Bridge to Clemson enrollment's growing. We intend to, we're doing a feasibility study now, we need to add 2 more science labs. That's a good problem to have. We're going to have more students in fall of 2020 than we can put in science labs. So we're in the process now of doing the feasibility study, which means we're getting a kind of a plus or minus cost estimate and asking if the place we want to do it makes sense. Have some life safety issues. One of our buildings, Oconee Hall, has been there a while, but we could not really get a fireman up and down the stairwell fully equipped with anybody if he had to carry somebody out. Those stairwells are incredibly narrow. I'm not sure how they ever met code back in the day, but there's a safety issue there. Honestly, no two of us could walk side by side up or down those stairs, so there's a real safety issue there we need to address. Plus, again, in that building, restrooms. So any and all of those capital renovation requests come out of our 5-year comprehensive permanent improvement plan we have to submit to the state of South Carolina for approval. They want us to make sure that anything we do is not a knee-jerk reaction, but is well thought out. We're in the midst of master facilities planning now, which is exactly what this is all about, asking what are your needs, what's going to work for the future, what do you need to fix, and what's it going to cost. So the net effect, though, for next year is a decrease in our request. I do appreciate our staff and the way they have very sharp pencils and work very hard to make sure that we get what we pay for and we only pay for what we need. So I think there's another piece in there with you, breaking down some of the expenses, a couple of pages, but I'll be glad to ask any questions. And I hope I'm probably the only person that's going to come ask for less money next year. But I could say don't get used to it, but I won't be here next year doing this, so I don't know what the future will bring, but I think we're in a good spot. You can see the bond payment went down a little bit. That's because of we were able to put a little bit of money on that bond before it was finished, and we came in on time and under budget, actually, on both of those projects. Not by much, but we met our number on our big capital projects.
Well, Dr. Booth, first like to say we appreciate the great job you've done over the years, and we've served the 3 counties, and we appreciate you and wish you well.
Thank you.
Any other comments?
Yes, sir.
Yes,
Mr.
I'd
Hart.
like just to echo what he said.
We really appreciate the support, and it really is fun to now tell people, yes, we do in fact have a campus, and I know we have road work on the horizon. That's moving ever slow as it does, but that's going to be even sweeter when we get that Highway 11 work done and the career centers out there. I think you're going to have a show place to be proud of.
Yep.
Mr. Chairman, anything?
No, I'm good. I've thanked you enough, so appreciate all that you do and your board does. And, you know, I know your future president will continue to value Oconee just as you did, and appreciate all that you do for our workforce, and it's much appreciated, so.
All right, thank you much.
Thank you, Dr. Booth.
All right, thank you.
Next thing on the agenda is the budget discussion for 2019-2020 year. Mrs. Brock?
Good afternoon, gentlemen. We have a
You pull that. I
PowerPoint.
was gonna say you're.
Pulling it up. I have to move Mr. Root stuff first. I'm kidding. So we do have a PowerPoint presentation. We have paper copies as well for anyone in the audience that may want a copy. This is a liquid moving budget this year because we are going through departments line by line, expenditures line by line, and possible revenues line by line. For the past 30 days, me and the staff here have been doing nothing but crunching numbers. And it's been a wonderful experience for us in some ways. It's been definitely a learning experience for me, understanding what every single thing in this budget is. So I'm going to let Liddell get started on the first part of the PowerPoint for you. Finish handing out some documents. We'll go over the highlights, the lowlights, and then we'll do question and answer. The books you have in front of you have data in it that was complete and accurate as of Friday. Not that any of the data in the books was inaccurate, but we have made some changes since then, and we'll go over those with you as we progress through the meeting. Here. I can move. At our age, we need glasses. A pair on the head, a pair in the purse.
I have no hair on my head and I wear contacts, so.
Okay, the first slide you'll see is the agenda. It's the same as it's been every year, just telling you the names of the different funds, the revenues, expenditures, special revenues, capital projects, the enterprise debt service, and then we talk about the proposed budget. Okay, the next slide just restates your vision statement and your mission statement. And then we're going to get into the general fund. The general fund summary you'll see in this page, the revenues and expenditures for each year are in those little boxes, and you can see the actual revenues and expenditures. And then for the recommended, you'll see that very last box. The next page is a little bit of more detailed. It shows you broke down into the categories like taxes, intergovernmental, license, permits, and fees, and so forth. And it will show you the increase, decrease on the very end from the recommended to 2020 budget and the 2019 budget. And then the 18 and 17 are actual numbers. And then the next page is just another pretty picture to show you, a little bit about how the revenues are trending as the economy continues to hopefully boom. The next is the expenditures, and it's also broken down into the different categories. You'll see the general government, the public safety, transportation, public works, culture and recreation, judicial services, health and welfare, economic development, non-departmental, other financing, and then the debt service lease payments. And then again, you've got your actual for the first 2 years, and then your budget for the next year, and then the recommended. You'll also see increases and decreases. And then another pretty picture that just shows sort of, the spikes and the actual numbers. This tells you a little bit about the departments, the categories that they're grouped in. Okay. The next section is just the other financing sources and uses. The top part are sources, money that is coming in to the general fund, and the bottom is the monies that are going out. You can see that 18 was when we done the big out to correct our books for the Focus Fund, and we're on track with that now. And then from 19 on, those two different things are just our victim services funds. We have to supplement them every year due to fines are not what they used to be. And another chart to show you those sources and uses. And then we come to the special revenue.
I can start there, sure. We're sort of tag teaming this like we have everything else we've worked on this week. So under the special revenue funds, you'll see the Emergency Services Fund, the Sheriff's Victims Assistance Fund, the Solicitor's Victims Assistance Fund, the 911 Communications Fund, the Tri-County Technical College Fund, and the Road Maintenance Fund. All of these funds have designated millage and accompanying ordinances that require us to statutorily divert money from the tax stream to these funds for specific purposes outlined in each of the funds. The Emergency Services Fund is used to purchase capital equipment, small equipment, support for the 17 rural stations, and ancillary equipment when we make a vehicle purchase. If there's a special item that has to be added to that, we can use this fund for that. The fund balance in that account has remained the same for quite some time because of the past 10 years. The construction of each of the substations has come out of this fund. Once all of the construction for the substations is completed and apparatus purchases get leveled out a little better, the fund balance on this particular fund should increase within the next 3 to 5 years. The Sheriff's Victim Assistance Fund, as Ms. Price just said, is a supplemental fund that we're required to have by law, actually. This one is not just by order. The fund balance on this one does decrease just a little bit because of the surcharges and the transfers in from the fund. This is one of those things that when you have a victim of a crime and the perpetrator cannot pay the restitution or the services provided for it to go through the system properly, it's a supplemented amount from the county. The Solicitor's Victims Assistance Fund is the same thing, and actually I think this one's interesting because this is also a place where if someone can't pay, then there is a service provided to a victim through the court system, and that we have to supplement that as well. The 911 Communications Fund is just that as well. There'll be some discussion later in this evening at the council meeting about the purchase of some upgraded radio equipment through the 911 and Communications Center funds. These are for radio towers, 911 communication systems, the E911 system, and the extension of that service to the municipalities. You just recently heard from Dr. Booth from the Tri-County Technical College Fund. And their request is certainly in line with what is in your books this evening. That's one of those numbers that did not change. And the road maintenance fund. The road maintenance fund is established, obviously, for the maintenance of roads. This fund has a nice fund balance in it and has designated millage. Part of the reason the fund balance has remained so high this year is with the amount of rainfall that we endured last year. There was very little opportunity or chance for us to provide maintenance on gravel roads. There was absolutely no sense in going to dump 20 tons of gravel knowing that 20 inches of rain was coming up in the next few days. We will be depleting the balance in this fund as the weather gets better and the maintenance on the roads increases over the summer. And finally, on the last two are your capital project funds. Your first is the Economic Development Fund, and the second is the Bridge and Culvert Fund. The Economic Development Fund has a designation of 1.1 mil per year, and obviously these are used for any of the economic development investments that Oconee County is a part of. At this time, the 1.1 mil, I think it's what, 3 years now? It was 2.0, but with the arrangement of the change in percentage for capture on the fee in lieu of tax agreements a few years ago, the millage was lowered with the hope that the fee in lieu of arrangement would make up for the difference in the mills. And finally, the Bridge and Culvert Fund. This obviously is for bridges and culverts. The fund balance of $3.8 million in this fund may look excessive, but if you've ever tried to replace a bridge or a large culvert, you will see that this is not excessive, and bridges are very expensive. This is one of those funds that we're going to have to allow to build up before we can do anything, because we won't have enough in the fund to replace a bridge without this balance being increased significantly. And the last page is the Rock Quarry Enterprise Fund. I'm sure y'all all know what the rock quarry is, but you know that the rock quarry generates quite a bit of revenue. And this year, part of that revenue is going to be transferred back to Oconee County General Fund to help supplement the budget and decrease the burden of tax on the citizens. And finally, at the very end are the debt service fund requirements. These are for the lease options that we had earlier and for any debt service that we have made outstanding. That's the overview of all of this. If y'all want to go back and look for the departmentals and the 10 fund, this will be where your book is and the documentation provided here for you. Start to go over where we are this year, where we think we may fall short, where we've made some cuts, and items that we have not found a place or funding for in this year's budget. Want to start with questions, or do you want me to do a highlight over? I know there have been plenty of questions from me to staff, because a lot of this I just didn't know what it was. I knew where it was and why we funded it, but I didn't know what it was.
Well, why don't you keep going, and then we'll ask questions at the end.
Okay. First of all, we'll go over the highlights. The difference between last year's budget and this year's budget is $1.61 million. The increase in this year's budget can be attributed to several things. A short and sweet list of those things, though, is dental insurance increase for staff, insurance vision increase for staff. We added all these staff members a few years ago, and we have not been able to find a number to put in the budget. When you add 8 to 10 positions at a time, it's hard to say what that insurance increase is going to be. So we have waited a couple years to implement the numbers into the line item budgets for this year for those insurance programs, because we're pretty sure these are close to accurate. The $200,000 increase is for the property and loss insurance that the state notified us of month and a half ago. We've actually fallen short this fiscal year in our P&L line item. We increased that an additional $200,000. The retiree health stipend is a program for a handful left of the older retirees who were in the previous plan, the insurance for life plan, so to speak, and we do give them reimbursements for insurance outside of the county that they have to purchase. We have reinstated money for the health clinic here at Pine Street. We had a 2 years ago, I believe, cut back the hours of the nurse clinic here. The nurse clinic here is a vital benefit to the employees and the families of employees on our health plan and help decrease out-of-work cost, out-of-pocket costs for staff, and there are no co-pays, obviously, so it's a big savings for us. Me, myself, I just went to the nurse yesterday, literally 10 minutes, $3 later in a prescription, and I'm back on my feet and back at work. The big, big benefit to us. The staffing study, we'll come back to that one in just a moment. $40,800 to reinstate the funding for the position that was previously cut in the treasurer's office. The treasurer had found a way to keep his staff member on. I think in some ways that cutting the funding for the staff that collects our taxes for us is sort of short-sighted. Restoring that funding for that office to work as efficiently and ably as possible to serve the public in a way that is not infringing on the public's time when they come to make a tax payment. They shouldn't have to stand in line because they're short-staffed in that particular office, so we have refunded that money back to there. And there's an additional portal to the software system that we're using for our HR and finance. It's like our clock system. There's some benefit portals that we could better utilize and not have to increase the staff or paperwork or documentation in offices. So that would be an efficiency, but it is $78,000 additionally for the software. But over time, this will pay for itself. The $926,000, I think in your book it's $951. It is on page 14. It's in the administrator's office. I know one of you had a question earlier. That's a large amount of money with a small description. Because of the fact that we have not had a staffing study or a wage and comp study completed and implemented in the past 7 years, I did include in my budget a request in professional, which is $65,000 in addition to what you see, for a wage and comp study to be conducted by the COG. The line beneath there where it says staffing study implementation is the beginnings of funding that I have found, that we have found actually, cutting materials from the rest of this budget to help implement that staffing study. One of the hardest things about getting a staffing study done for the county in the past years is that we put aside the money for the study itself, but we never set money aside to actually implement the program. Knowing that we have not implemented one in 7 years, I'm going to estimate that $1.5 million is going to be on the low end of the first year of implementation for that. I realize that's a lot of money, but it's our staff, and the one thing we do provide is service, and we cannot provide that without people.
One question on that. So you don't have $1.5 million in the budget, though?
No, sir, I have $65,000 in my request, and then an additional $926,000 in cuts that I have made throughout the rest of the departments and miscellaneous areas.
So that's
that I have sort of
600,000
stashed back.
short if it's going to take $1.5 million, though, right?
I believe we're going to be short, yes, sir. I will keep looking. I will keep looking. I would rather us buy a cheaper shovel and get a little more money. We have laughed at me. I've literally put in there 200 and 300 at a time, saying, oh, we didn't have that much electricity. I don't want to undercut the budget so much that we're short on funding the county operations, but at the same time, I don't want to cut this short enough to where our staff has to worry if they're going to get a raise or not.
Any questions?
Summarizing some of the wage or increases, decreases in several of the departments. We usually have a laundry list of requests for new positions, and we had quite a handful this year. But we only made one, well, other than restoring the funding for the position that Mr. Nowell did not cut from the treasurer's office. There's one additional position. It's a full-time position. It's at South Cove, and it's for an office manager. This was a few years ago when we erected the new PRT building at South Cove. We essentially took the PRT staff and placed them into that building. That building also has the concessions and park store. So what we've done is taken the PRT assistants and had her run the park store, the staff. They need some help. The park store is bringing in approximately $200,000. Am I right, Phil? Close. Right about 200, sir? Yes, sir, about a 70% increase in sales. That position will also help with the liaison with the campers and the staff, but not just at the store, but at the park itself. I feel like that one in some ways is probably the most vital to this, because as our park revenues grow and reservations increase, again, service is what we sell, and we cannot do that without the staffing to do so. A couple of other positions that were requested, and we have kept these at part-time, were additional funding in the sheriff's office professional line item for a part-time bailiff at the clerk of court's office in the courthouse. We have increased in the amount of sessions court that are being held in the courthouse, and the bailiffs have not increased since they moved the building. And the treasurer's reinstatement. Several unknowns in this budget. I told you it was a fluid document. It is alive and well. It will get up and walk out. Hold your hand on it. Unknowns are there are contracts that are based on CPI increases. Any contracts we have that are allowed a CPI increase that are up for renewal are allowed the 2.2% that the CPI did increase this year. Some of those contracts may not be up before July 1st or at July 1st, because normally they're approved in a fiscal year. So there may be some unknowns there with renewals. I've left another $15,000, I think, in the professional line item there for that, just in case there are fluctuations there. Several of the things that were listed on the strategic plan are not included in this document, and they can be included, but we would have to look at some funding mechanisms to be able to include those. One of those is the maintenance for the ownership of the sewer line, which is what we're referring to as the phase 1 now. We could take that out of the economic development millage, but it would have to be a designated amount according to the documentation that we have provided back and forth with the sewer authority on the operation agreement. The EPA and the RIA both want solid evidence that we have a funding commitment, not just for now, but into the future. I don't know how to estimate the amount of maintenance we would need to have in that separate account or in that designated area for that. My recommendation, after talking with Chris and understanding that we may have some ancillary costs from the 5 to 7 year time, up until now we haven't had a large cost on the line because we don't have customers on the line. We don't know how many customers we're going to have on the line. We don't know how many cuts there are going to be, T-intersections, et cetera, et cetera. So I would recommend opening that escrow account with $100,000 and $200 to $225 annually put aside for that. It could be evaluated at the end of 3 to 5 years and us come up with an average. But again, I don't want to set it in such a shortfall the first 3 years that we have to make up for it over the next 5 to 7. Just because we didn't take the time or energy to put the extra money aside in the first place. The other items that are not included in this budget are capital vehicles. We have had discussion, I think that was last year about this time we started discussion on the capital vehicle replacement. You should pass out those. We've got some documents for you. Hang on just 1 second. In the meantime, while she's handing those documents out, does anybody have any questions on what's in front of them or what I said?
On the phase 1, you're looking at, let's say, 150,000 of the 2019 budget to start with, and you're talking about 225 in the 2020. Is that what you would bring
That
up?
would be my recommendation, yes, sir.
Okay. And then that would be set aside, kind of like a general fund number on there, allotted. Okay. So the amount budgeted for this one would be 150 is what you're estimating.
Correct,
that
yes,
to be.
sir. And if we find that those expenditures are not necessary or needed after that first 3 to 5 year period, we could reallocate some of that money back for other projects for economic development. But knowing that we have the extra 4.3 miles coming up in phase two, and that we're probably gonna be paying for operation and maintenance on those lines as well. I think it would serve us well to plan rather than to fail to plan.
I agree with that.
Now, I personally was not a part of the conversation last year for the request to, or the idea of the designation of funding for capital vehicles, but we've laid these out in two separate categories for you. On the top of the first sheet where it says roads and bridges, okay, actually, it's your third sheet. It's just the half-page version. Breaking out the vehicles for the Roads and Bridges Department was specifically because if we had changed the language in the road maintenance designated millage and increased the mill by 0.5 mil, even half a mil, the road maintenance and equipment could potentially be pulled out of the same mill. So in years like this, when we had the designated millage set aside for road maintenance that we were unable to use, and on July 1st received increased millage, some of the smaller vehicles, and I realize these are all very expensive, but road equipment is very expensive. But there are some items on here that could have been purchased without impacting the county negatively while keeping a portion of the road maintenance fund active and alive in order for us to go back and make up for the time that we did not have repairs made because of the weather. This is a lot to take in, and I understand that. Funding for the road and bridges vehicles just for this 1 year is $957,000. Estimating the millage amount to be $548,364. It would take 1.7 mils to cover that. If we wanted to include those vehicles back in and complete it as a capital vehicle plan, as a lump sum for the county, we could easily do that. But on the second package, which would have been your first and second pages, the capital vehicle request for the departments here, and these are prioritized by Ernie Beck at Vehicle Maintenance. He's been a godsend helping us get all of this information together. The items in green at the top of the page are those that we feel like we could work out in-house, transferring one department to another based on the availability and need of the departments themselves. The highlighted fire trucks in the middle, generally, fire trucks take about a year to order and get delivered. We still have one fire truck remaining for this year. Okay, we're doing RFPs now, so by the time we got those in, we would need to do the RFPs for the ones that were highlighted in yellow, but technically they wouldn't be paid for until the next year, which would be 21. Implementing this is going to be costly at first because it is something that has been ignored for years. And I shouldn't have said ignored, that was terrible. I'd like to retract that. It is something that has been unfunded for years.
Not funded properly. It's been funded, but pieces at a time.
And it's awfully difficult to look at these numbers. I mean, like on the capital vehicle fund, the first 2 pages that I gave you, the total at the bottom of the page for this 1 year being $848,000. That's 1.5 mils as well. I bored you all? I'll try harder.
So after this first year, will we have like a 5-year plan, replacement plan?
After the first year, there is a plan. I'd love to tell you that it's 5 years, but honestly, you better look at a 7-year plan.
Good.
Honestly. If you did it in 5 years, one, we would have to double the amount, or at least 50% increase vehicle maintenance staff. Because for every single vehicle that we recommend purchasing this year, 5 or 6 years from now, we need them to be worked on, in addition to the ones we're currently working on. And of course, a lot of them are going to roll off. But when you buy this lump of vehicles at one time, like for the sheriff's office here, and I'm not picking on the sheriff, it's just happened to be the top of the page here, buying 9 Crown Vics at one time, all of them are on the road, all of them are traveling. Year 6, they're all hitting about 100 and whatever thousand miles, and we're, you know, the oil changes are gonna come more frequently, timing belt or whatever's gonna go out, air conditioner, compressors. We'll need to add staff, but as long as we keep implementing these, and of course, we'll take the older ones off the road. But when you're buying in this large of a lump, a lot of the things that are going to happen at about the same time. And this could be detrimental to a department where we just replace 10 vehicles. They can't have 10 off the road at one time.
Any questions? Thank you.
Yes,
I
sir?
think this is a good first start. I think we've
And it's
got,
a very liquid document,
Yeah,
a
we-
very liquid document. We'll keep making changes to it until we feel like we've hammered it down and smoothed it out and hammered it down and smoothed it out. There are still some other unknowns in the departments. There are several things that won't be known until we get closer to the end of this year to figure out how realistic this year's budget numbers are. There may be places we can make cuts. There may be places that'll be increased based on something that we just didn't see. But I think this is a good place to start.
yes, I agree.
I got a question.
Yes, sir.
On this fund balance or on our debt service, have we got any of those debts coming close to being paid?
Yes, sir, actually, we do. There's one that can be paid off next year. Is it next year?
That's in on the 10 fund.
Are you referring to leases or bonds?
Bonds, like for the grading, we paid for it, the, Route
Industry
11
and Technology
complex.
Park, that's Bond A. Hold on one second, I can tell you. So that would have been 2013, and it's a 10, so it'll be 2023. Now, some of the capital lease payments are coming up soon. That's for when we did the capital lease a few years ago to purchase the large amounts of equipment. 14 or 15, I think one of them is payable in 2021. I think that's
Page
in the PowerPoint.
85.
Hang on one second to be able to answer that one a little better for you.
Yeah, the last payment's in 2021.
2021. Mr. Hart, when you said the word fund balance, though, you did trigger a thought that I'd been tossing around in my head, and I'd even spoken early on the telephone with Mr. Elliott about. One of the goals established was increasing the fund balance in the strategic plan retreat this year, and I believe that we have 7 years to make that plan. We're roughly at 13 now. We need to be close to 20 million in our fund balance for the reserve. I think if we included language in every budget ordinance that in the annual appropriations of funding for the county operations on an annual basis, any leftover expenditures should be reverted back to the fund balance and reserved for that with a minimum anticipation of 1 mil or 500,000, whichever's closer.
And I believe that was an ordinance that was passed last year, having to do with the 7 years and getting to the 20 million.
At this time in the year, it's way too early to estimate what kind of leftover we're going to have out of the budget we've set for this year. This is the time of year where things happen unknown. We replace more HVAC units than anywhere I can imagine. But this is the time of year when it's 35 at night and 75 during the day that we get the, oh, my air's broken, oh, my air's broken. So we don't know how much we're going to have left after this year, but I do know whatever we do have left, I do believe that we should go ahead and start transferring everything back for that reserve, for the buildup of the fund balance. And obviously not to use fund balance as any part of operational costs as we move forward.
I agree. Fee in lieu of tax agreements, do we have any expiring anytime soon?
There are a couple that have expired, actually. Of course, I put that in the back, hang on. With the arrangement with the difference for the fee in lieu of tax, we've seen some revenues we weren't expecting, but we did budget for them in the upcoming year. I think we're at 420 something right now. And it was a little higher than estimated. There were a couple of the fee in lieu ofs that had made some modifications. Hold on one second, it's right here. Have, let's see. A few that are coming off. I don't want to say company names. We have 3 that are coming off. Actually, we have 4 that are coming off this year. We've got a couple of additional that have come on this year that I have not reviewed the document close enough to include those in the budget estimate for next year either, though.
Okay.
Yeah, Mr. Hart, I think what your, same question that I asked in the last 2 years. You got your detention center payment and your workforce development that we added in 2016. Because those alone, if you look at the detention center, is that GO bond, is there a way to, on the detention center, it's, what do we got, 10 years left on that? 12? Is there a way on, I don't guess anything is improved with us to change that GO bond? Seems like the,
I can contact our financial advisor and the bond attorneys, and they check the market and let us know.
okay. I know we talked about that last year. I don't think we did that because I think
And
we're,
I don't know when the last time we've gone for a bond rating.
because that's the only one that's
15,
really high. I
maybe?
just was
14?
looking at interest between the two bond, not obviously the payment because it's a different amount, but between what we
Maybe
had at the Workforce Development Center versus that. I know we got a good rate on that one, but I don't know what the,
And I can pull the
Detention center
information
is.
even before the council meeting this evening for the detention center to get the rate on that.
because that pretty much took our bond capacity, which when you do a huge project like the detention center, it should take your bond. Not something you do all the time.
Any other questions? Rocky, anything else for us?
Thank you all, one. Secondly, obviously, we can't make a quick decision on the vehicle replacement plan, or the designation for any of that, but I do want you to take those with you. And as the days go by, keep things in mind on how we can address the vehicle issue, because if we do not address it, it will not be an issue, it will be a crisis.
I do know the vehicle replacement is something we harped on a lot last year on getting back on track, because you're gonna pay for it one way or the other, either in parts or in vehicles. So I know they're doing a fantastic job keeping those vehicles on the road, but at the same time, a lot of these are very important vehicles getting to and from calls. So I would appreciate council making an effort to do everything we can to get that vehicle replacement plan back back where it should be.
And over the next few weeks, we'll have better ideas. We may be able to bring you scenarios for you to look at and not ask you to just pick out of the sky. There may be scenarios that we can provide for you. And of course, you're going to have to spend the money, but we may be able to provide you with 3 options on spending the money, and you can pick the least painful way.
It is a 2 to 3 year process, getting that back on track. I know we made a little bit of effort last year, fell short a little bit at budget on getting that back to where it should be on there. But we're either gonna have to pay for it now or pay for it later, so it's still another 2-year process to get that back where it should be, so.
Yes, sir.
I know it's my effort, and if you look from the sheriff vehicle on their replacement plan to especially roads and bridges are in dire need, and the things that we continually replace on roads and bridges, some of the stuff that they're having to work with is dangerous as well. So especially when they're hauling, equipment, so. That's all I have, Mr. Elliott.
Okay, here again, I think it's a good first start. I appreciate all the hard work, and I know we've got some hard work to do going forward, but thank you.
We do, and thank you all. Thank you.
Is there a motion to adjourn?
Make a motion.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.